All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to our June virtual all hands for Tech for Campaigns. It's been a couple of months and a lot is happening both at TFC and in the political role that we're excited to talk about. So for a quick agenda here, it's not a quick agenda, sorry. It's a medium length agenda, which is part of why I'm excited. Do a quick update on our team. We'll talk about the voter suppression that's happening in states like Texas, the really dramatic stories, and we're lucky to be joined by Representative Donna Howard here to tell that story. After that, we'll talk about our strategy for the next couple of years, about how we are going to have an impact on this and other large questions in politics, and then give an update. Dylan and Rob will give updates on what we've been up to, both in the sort of learning area and actually in the action area. So we are very excited to be welcoming a new head of operations. It's starting the end of the month, Amanda. And so for those of you folks who are volunteering or active with TFC, you will start to see her name quite a bit. She's already starting to ramp up, and we're extremely lucky and excited to have her on board. And with that good note, we're going to talk about some sad stuff, because that ultimately is what we're here to do, is to help stop it. And for that, I will hand it over to Elsa, our campaign director.
Yeah, hello everyone. I wouldn't say I'm excited to be here to talk about voter suppression, but I'm here to talk about voter suppression tonight. This is something that's really important in terms of state legislatures, because as you can see here, these things are happening on the state legislative level, right? So this is why the work that we do here and why the work that you all as volunteers provide to our candidates is so important, because the more state legislative seats we can turn Democrat, the more we're going to have an impact on these. But just so you can take a big picture look, right, there's been 216 bills across the country that have been introduced to diminish voting rights. So those can be anywhere from, really limiting the places you can vote, to criminalizing people who are doing their jobs in the election sphere, so criminalizing some Secretary of State roles or county election officials roles, politicizing, all of the politics. You've heard a lot of it. So there's been a lot of bills introduced. Texas is leading the way in the state, and we're very excited to have Representative Howard here to talk about the work that they're doing in Texas. So recently, as you may have heard or may not, there is a big voter suppression bill introduced in Texas that was needed to be voted on. There's like this midnight deadline that exists in Texas for a bill called SB 7. So SB 7 did a whole bunch of things, but most importantly, or some of the most egregious moments of the bill were, it limits Sunday early voting, so any voting before 1 p.m., which is when a lot of Black churches in Texas have Souls to the Polls drives, so everyone will come to the congregation and then go vote together and get out the vote that way. So this really is clearly, was clearly very much targeted at this Souls to the Polls type events. It also introduced a ban on drive-through voting, which is really, targeted at Harris County, which covers Houston, and 24-hour day of voting, just trying to limit the possibility of how people can vote, and then increases ID requirements for voting by mail, which I always find terrifying and fascinating, because it's just such a simple way that people will miss a checkbox on a form, and now their vote is invalid and you can't do anything about it. And so all of these things were introduced in this bill in SB 7, and Democrats took the very last step that they could in fighting this bill, which was walking off the floor to break quorum. And we'll hear a little bit about this in a minute, but this is a very big deal and a very strategic and dramatic step, and it's not something that we can do every single day for every single bill. So we'll talk about other ways that we can fight this sort of voter suppression. Greg? And so, sorry, you guys all disappeared from my screen. Okay, there you are. And so this is, going across the entire country. I think that there's levels of awareness about the voter suppression bills that are happening, and it's still not where it needs to be, right? We elected President Biden. We're very excited about that. There's a lot of enthusiasm about HR 1, but a lot of this voter suppression is still going to happen in the states. and it's still happening at largely GOP-run state legislatures throughout the country. And so it's incredibly important that we continue to do this work. And with that, I would like to introduce Representative Donna Howard with the Texas House of Representatives. She covers District 48, which is in Austin. She's been a longtime representative and, long-term representative in the party in Texas and in the caucus, has a very strong voice there. And we're excited to hear a little bit about what happened in Texas and learn about what's going on there. So Representative Howard.
Yeah, appreciate it. And first thing I have to do is thank Tech for Campaigns for what you did on my particular campaign. I was late to getting on board. Y'all were already here in Texas, but I found out about you and you were welcoming and let me come in toward the end and did a great job. I ended up winning with 70% of the vote. Brought in $18,000 with the email campaign that y'all helped put in place for me. So just a phenomenal outcome from y'all's help. And, I have a very unique district in that I'm in Austin. Most of the people that are here in Austin, the capital is part of our community. So people are very engaged and connected, and you can't really play games with them. They know what's going on. So one of the things that I found extremely helpful that y'all did for me was allow the authentic voice, my authentic voice, to be a part of this rather than just putting some template on top of me. Phenomenal job. I just can't thank y'all enough. So I wanted to make sure I said that. And just to give you a little perspective before I get into what happened with this particular bill, I want to go back just a second to when I first came into the legislature, which was in a special election in 2005. And I actually ended up winning in a 57% Republican district. And one of the things that I credit with that win, besides being my authentic self, was that I had someone who had been watching Karl Rove and recognized the value of doing, for lack of a better term, and I'm not a technology person, data mining. And none of the Democrats were doing that at the time. Nobody here was doing that. And he helped me target with my limited resources, my message to particular people. And I credit that a lot with my win. Fast forward to now and what y'all are doing and why you're so very important. We have Brad Parscale or whatever his name is, and Trump doing their thing with social media, taking it to the next level. We need your expertise. We need what you bring to people like me to help us use the tools that are available here that we don't necessarily have the skills to use, but use what's available and make sure that we have something in place that's going to counter what some of these Republicans are doing. So just wanted to make sure I said that because what y'all are doing is so very valuable. But let me go into what's happening now. Again, kind of looking back at the session before this, we actually, with your help, we actually flipped some seats. We gained 12 Democratic seats in our 150 member House of Representatives. That was huge. We ended up with 67 Democrats to the 83 Republicans. Obviously not anywhere near the majority or even close to it exactly, but a significant shift that really got people's attention. And we focused last session on those issues that really make a difference in the day-to-day lives of Texans. We focused on public education and passed some pretty decent legislation and stayed away from some of these social wedge issues that most business Republicans don't want to see get on the floor. So fast forward to this election cycle. With y'all's help, we were able to maintain and preserve seats, but we didn't get any gains. And even though we came in with the same number in the legislature, the result of that election was such that there was a lot of, for lack of a better term, Republican retribution. for us making them have to win their campaigns by having to work it and spend money and actually campaign. So we came in this time with a new speaker and new chair people, and with that kind of bitter attitude, if you will. And all of those issues that had been kept off of the floor that were laughable by many of my Republican colleagues in the past, the business, mainstream type Republicans, laughable. Not only did they get to the floor, but they passed. So even though we came into this session dealing with COVID, and then a month later dealt with the horrific freeze where apparently 700 Texans died, we had those challenges, and yet we focused as a legislative body on these social wedge issues and actually got them, they actually passed them. Permitless carry. You can walk around Texas with a gun on your hip, never taken a class, never learned anything about shooting a gun or about safety. That passed. Guns in hotels. Hotels can't tell you you can't have guns there now. I mean, the list goes on and on about guns. We had, I think, probably something like 8 or 10 gun bills, not about safety, despite the fact this was our first session after the El Paso and Midland, Odessa shootings. It was all about giving more access to guns. We had the worst abortion bill that's happened in the country so far. The so-called heartbeat bill, which, and I'm a nurse, so I can nerd out on that a bit, but the fact is that they're calling it a heartbeat bill, even though there's no heart actually developed at that point in time. There's cardiac tissue that has electrical impulses. And so that happens around 6 weeks gestation, which is actually only 4 weeks of pregnancy, because you start measuring it from the last period and you don't get pregnant till 2 weeks after that. You're 4 weeks pregnant. You don't even know you're pregnant. And it's banned. To make it even worse, anybody, anywhere can sue anybody who's done anything to aid and abet someone seeking an abortion. That means, actually, even if you intend to, that's in the bill. If you intend to aid and abet, give a ride to somebody, that sort of thing, you can be sued. It's horrific. Critical race theory. Yeah, we did that one too. Can't talk about slavery and racial issues in schools. But the worst, of course, and what caused the walkout was the voter suppression. The way I look at that is virtually stuffing the ballot box. That is saying, we're going to make sure that only certain people can vote, and we're going to virtually stuff the ballot box so that it will be in our favor. You already heard from Elsa about some of what was in that bill. It is so bad that it even has things like you can overturn an election even without proving fraud. It was so bad that even the Republicans in retrospect now are saying, oh my God, that's horrific. That's horrible. That shouldn't have even happened. This is how close we were to passing something that even my Republican colleagues are saying, that's not what we meant to have in there. They hadn't read it. This was done at the last minute, middle of the night kind of thing, breaking all the rules. And I'm not talking about what the Democrats did. I'm talking about what the Republicans on the Senate side did. They suspended rules in order to push something through with new language that nobody had seen. It had not been debated. My Senate colleagues did a great job of trying to push it as far as they could. They went till like 6:30 in the morning debating this bill. It came over to the House on that last day of the deadline at midnight. It finally came up in the evening. Prior to that, I have to give props to my colleagues of color, the brown and black colleagues of color in the House, the Democrats. They had determined pretty early on that this was something that was so egregious, was so against their community, that all they could see that we could do is to walk. it's harder to make that actually happen than it sounds, especially when you're trying to corral at least 51 people to walk off the floor. But what ended up happening is several people during the day kind of trickled off the floor is the way it kind of worked. And then several of us were still on the floor preparing speeches, preparing points of order with the intention of debating the bill and running out the clock and killing it that way if we could. What actually ended up happening is the Republicans actually pulled another card on us, though, about 10:30 that night, and said they were going to call the question, which meant they were going to cut off any debate on a bill that is so significant to our very democracy. It's the foundation of our democracy. They didn't even know what was in it. They couldn't answer questions about it. And rather than debate it and discuss something this critical, they were going to cut off any debate and discussion. And it was at that point that many of the rest of us turned around and walked off the floor. And we had one of our members had set up a meeting place for us at a Black church in East Austin. And we met up there, and it was a glorious moment, I got to tell you, when we felt so empowered about what we had been able to do to stop this egregious legislation from getting through. And we also knew that this could be a rallying call for the entire country. And of course, you've probably seen in the media that many of my colleagues were invited to the White House. They met yesterday with our Vice President Kamala Harris. They also met with several other legislators. And there is a real, I guess, enthusiasm now about making sure that we don't let this kind of legislation pass and take away our opportunity to determine our democracy. So it has been an extremely amazing journey to be on. I'm so proud of my colleagues. Now, let me just do the very footnote here, say that obviously that's not the end. Republican Governor Greg Abbott has said that he is going to call us back into a special session and force us to deal with this issue again. And to make it even more difficult for us to not show up, he is threatening to veto the legislative branch of government. That is virtually creating a monarchy, eliminating the legislative branch, vetoing the entire legislative branch. Well, we're looking at all kinds of actions that we could take to deal with that. He has until this Saturday to make that veto threat real. We're going to see what he's going to do. He hasn't told us when the special would be. We're thinking it's probably going to be late July or into August. And we'll determine how we're going to respond as a Democratic caucus. But I can tell you that we're united against this legislation. We will do what we need to do to make sure it doesn't pass, and that every person in this state who is eligible to vote, every citizen in this state has access to the polls and their voice will be heard. So y'all are doing such an amazing work here to make sure that those messages are out there. And I'm just really thrilled to have been working with you. You have such a big role to play here, and I thank you for having me tonight and let me share this story with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I had not heard he wants to veto the entire legislative branch. That's absolutely wild. I want to ask one quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
So in the long term, right, we've seen more and more anti-democracy bills come up over the past few years, right? They've gone exponentially crazy this year, but in the long term, how do we stop these bills from continuing to grow year to year across the country and in Texas?
You know, this is again where I think y'all have a lot that you can help us with, because messaging and who owns the narrative is going to be so important here. What I hear from my Republican colleagues is we just want to make sure that the votes are secure and that everybody that has a right to vote gets to vote, but that we also make sure that people who aren't supposed to vote aren't doing it. I mean, they talk in a very practical kind of way. I think that when Americans realize and recognize how serious this is, though, how they're trying to take away our opportunities to get to the polls, whether it's by the mobile voting or if you're a service worker, all these people who were essential workers during COVID, all these people we valued who did all the work in retail and so forth, who work all these hours, need to have opportunities to vote as well. And that's why having extended hours is so important there. Looking at what's happening with those with disabilities, one of the egregious things in our bill was that you have to have a doctor's note to indicate that you are disabled and can't actually show up at the polls. Astounding that that's going to actually impact those with disabilities. And most importantly, I think for getting the message out to everybody, regardless of whether you're a service worker or you're an American of color, the fact is, if you are older in particular, and this happens a lot with Republicans who show up for the mail-in ballots because it's easier for them to do. They don't have to go to the polls and stand in long lines. They don't have to worry about being exposed to whatever's around. That's going to also be curtailed by what's being planned here. And let me just say real quickly too, back when in the 2010 election, when we had the big Tea Party takeover in Texas, we went from 74 Democrats, which was 74, 76. We were almost getting toward going toward the majority. We lost down to 49 that election cycle with the Tea Party takeover. I won my election that night by 16 votes out of over 50,000 cast. It was challenged. They did a tribunal on it, subpoenaed voters. By the time it was all done around March, after the November election around March, I was declared the winner by 4 votes. 4 votes out of over 50,000. And these so-called fraudulent or illegal votes were not there. There was not a single one there. It was things like a student who had moved back home and they voted in their Travis County vote, an elderly man, 94 years old, who had not signed his mail-in ballot appropriately. He was so scared when he got subpoenaed and had to come and testify about that. Thought he had done something wrong when he hadn't. This is the kind of thing, these stories, figuring out how we help Americans recognize what's really going on here. Things that they have taken for granted about being able to vote that are going to be stripped away. Less and less opportunity to vote. And we need to have that story. We need to have that narrative. We need to have that communication. And again, I think that's where you guys can help us figure out what's going to resonate, what's going to help us get that message across.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's almost like almost a segue for a later part of the call, which I did not plan to everybody. I want to ask, because, our audience is probably coastal liberal MSNBC watching people, tilted for sure. But you mentioned you were elected first in a majority Republican district. You're known for somebody that's worked well across the aisle. You mentioned sort of business Republicans. Like, what's happening over there? Because I feel like it sometimes appears to be this weird orb that's acting irrationally and just like operating on a different set of facts. Which is that what your perception is? Working sort of closely with folks over there.
Quite frankly, there are several of my Republican colleagues who actually share more common ground, but they have been put into a place of fear about speaking out because of the primary system that we have. Mm-hmm. If you don't kowtow to the base voter of the Republican primary, then you don't win. You go home and somebody much more conservative ends up getting to win this election. We're also dealing here in Texas with people like Greg Abbott, who's apparently running for president, we hear, who's moved further and further to the right. The Republican Party chair was Alan West, former congressman from Florida, who is so ultra conservative. The people that have been having the voice here, unfortunately, that's the voice that resonates. Governor Abbott today made a big deal of signing legislation about the permitless carry. Yesterday, he had a big hoo-ha with a bunch of Republicans behind him, not a single Democrat and not a single representative or senator that represents the border of Texas. And he was there to announce his emergency border orders, where he was going to start arresting these migrants who are asylum-seeking families coming over, arresting them and throwing them in jail. And he's going to build a wall. And he has started a GoFundMe campaign to build a wall. This is what's resonating right now with these voters. And, you know, I don't believe that's the majority of our state, but we still have a challenge with getting enough people registered and getting them to the polls and letting them know that they actually have choices to make. So, I mean, this is a big task. We've been working on this a long time, trying to hone in on that message and making sure that people do know that there is a party, there are a group of elected officials who really want to deal with those day-to-day impacts on their lives, education, healthcare, workforce, those kinds of things, and not get sidetracked with these wedge issues that are just simply a way to rally the primary voters that have been brought out in force because of Trump in a lot of ways. This whole election thing, you know, based on his big lie.
Right.
So anyway, that's what we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's scary. I guess hearing something today, it's like you really can't connect this back to birtherism with President Obama in 2009, and then it's kind of grown and grown and grown, and now it's sort of a very weird world. But with that, I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time and telling us the story and giving us the insight, because I really thought so excellent framing of the voting suppression is just one piece of a bunch of other real world impacts that are coming part and parcel. So thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate it.
All right. So we'll talk about what we're going to do about it. So we've spent the last few months really looking at what we can do in the next election cycle. And so this being politics, you really want to sort of plan in at least 2-year chunks, because you know it's coming. And so what we've gotten done since 2017 was when we were founded, and really founded in reaction to sort of the fact that, like Representative Howard alluded to, Republicans in 2016, basically outran Democrats, despite sort of a lot of supposed built-in advantages that we had in the Obama legacy. So we've done we were founded to be a permanent solution and an organization that would work on the digital Democrat problem and the problem set and the opportunity set. And so it's been obviously a roller coaster and a lot of really awesome stuff so far. We've done over 700 projects and almost 500 campaigns that we've helped either through volunteer services, software, and training even more. Our vote by mail program last year generated almost 400,000 signups in key states, and we built a variety of software tools both to help campaigns, legislative caucuses, and our volunteers. So the question of kind of what's next is still really interesting, and the kind of easy part, but the sad part is that we still have the same problems. Things have gotten better for sure. We are not in the depths of 2016 anymore, as far as sort of digital buy-in, but a lot of the stuff still is resonating, and it's still effective. So in our 2020 ads report that we put out a month ago, digital budgets were up from the sort of very minuscule level that they were in 16 and 18, but it's still basically 2 or 3x lower than where the commercial world is. Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, who's the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the organization that tries to elect Democrats to the U.S. House. In their postmortem, in addition to the messaging challenges that Representative Howard mentioned, quote that they're still overweighted on old media and need to invest in digital. So there's a money thing, there's a messaging thing about how decisions get made through telephone polling, which also didn't have the best year last year. And the sort of party-centric culture structural thing that's going on. So there's very limited best practice sharing. It's skewed towards the largest campaigns, and the wheel is being continually invented. It's not because people don't care, it's not because people don't want to learn, but it's just because everyone's looking for a new job every 1 to 2 years, and you're moving states, you're moving settings, the problem sets change, the world changes. And so there's still like a lot of room to do better at this. It's a 10-year project. It's a big problem, and something that moves slowly but steadily. So that's the tech side. The politics side, as Representative Howard really just alluded to, or just explained in Texas specifically, the GOP retains predominant control of state government. There was a conscious strategy around 2010 for the 2010 redistricting cycle that the Republican Party invested heavily in state legislatures while the Democrats didn't. It worked, and although we are no longer at the 2016 lows where the GOP controlled 69% of state legislative bodies, we're now at 60. So still not great. And the picture from here isn't, there's a lot of headwinds too. We have redistricting, especially in the South with these Republican trifectas, is going to be probably, there's a lot of racial and partisan gerrymandering. There's all the voter suppression laws and that cyclicality thing that I mentioned. So states need our help more than ever, and we need to keep making investments this year for next year, which is something we're doing. But there are also, obviously thousands of Democrats running for everywhere from city council to U.S. Congress. And ultimately, we want to find a way, or work on ways to help all of them. Because the wonderful thing about the Democratic Party is that it is a big tent, and there's a lot of different corners of the tent. So what we think of our goals for 2022 are in some ways a restatement, in some ways a focus on sort of tangible outcomes in these things. So one is to rigorously push the envelope on development and testing of best-in-class political digital marketing. We are blessed with best-in-class political talent and access to commercial talent who know what billion-dollar companies, the lessons they've learned at the ad platforms. Vote by mail program was really successful in testing a bunch of new things and new ways to reach people that don't have their phone number visible, and young people of color. Number two is to actually scale and execute these programs. So we've learned that it is the hard part is not the science, or not to minimize it, but like the hard part is there are these thousands of campaigns out there, and they all have very different levels of expertise, familiarity, availability, outcomes, funding, all that stuff. So if you volunteered on a race, you know that that's true. And so we've actually gotten quite good at it. But it's not just good. It's not just enough to have an R&D lab. And we need to go and do this stuff. And third is to build software tools that can help scale our impact. The volunteer base is our heart. It's our foundation. It's the thing we were all built on. It's the thing we're all talking to you about. It's super important. But in order to reach thousands of campaigns over the next few years, we need to use software and other like training and other light touch things. So with those goals in mind, what we're focusing on as our strategy for this upcoming cycle is something we're just going to talk briefly about today, but we'll just continue to iterate on, is what we call our learning engine, which is integrating our software and technology investments with the efforts of our volunteers and our staff into one cohesive place. Like Representative Howard was saying, politics comes down to the right messenger with the right message talking to the right person. And we have the ability to gather a sort of unusual amount of data about how messages are resonating across different states, across different levels of the ballot, incorporate that centrally and help Democrats make better decisions with their messaging and their spending. There is literally billions of dollars that are spent each election cycle that are completely wasted. It's either the wrong, the wrong geography, the wrong message, the wrong media channel, the wrong time, and that's real. Those are billions that are funded by union members, grassroots volunteers, donors of all stripes and sizes, and reallocating that money to effective uses is I think the moral thing to do, but it's also an efficacy thing. So there is a lot of untapped potential to channel that, to do rigorous development, to actually put it in practice, and make a lot of these media efforts a lot more successful at all levels of ballot. And so that's about our data. It's about supercharging our volunteers with new tools. It's about centralizing and structuring our analytics. It's about doing more research, like randomized controlled trials, message research, and making sure that as we do more projects, get more campaigns, do more training, do more research, that we are pushing on our flywheel. And as a volunteer or a staff member or somebody on a campaign that works with tech for campaigns, you are continually better off and able to make more intelligent decisions about how you do your messaging because of the learning engine that we'll be creating. So it's a conceptual, it's a 10,000 foot view. At this point, we just want to introduce the concept, and as we begin to work in some of the first tests and experiments of this concept, we'll be sharing more feature all hands. But it is, in a way, a restatement of things that we've been doing. And so I will pass it to Dylan Holmes to talk about some of the research that we've put out recently, some of the sort of key investments, and how it's informing what we're doing.
Thanks, Greg. So yeah, as you're probably wondering, what exactly would this learning engine look like in practice? And it's a combination of a lot of the learnings that we already distill from postmortem reports on our website, and a number of different initiatives that'll help people target their messages more effectively in campaigns. If you didn't see a few weeks ago, one great example of this was the 2020 ads report, which is analyzing digital advertising spend from a political lens on a national scale, but also looking at what worked best for the candidates that we worked with. As you can imagine, with COVID, the amount of money that was spent on this skyrocketed, but so did the amount of disinformation, the QAnon conspiracy theories, and really divisive messaging became really rampant. But it's not just a medium for that disinformation. One really key learning that we were able to uncover from this was that digital advertising continues to be a really critical tool for state level candidates to be able to get out their message in a cost-effective way to the right people. And so if you read through this, there's a lot of information, but one interesting nugget that's important to highlight is that in some regions of the country, Facebook is actually 12 times more cost-effective than TV at getting a particular voter to remember an ad. And that is huge when somebody like Representative Howard wins by only 4 votes in a particular election. So we're really eager to be able to package up and translate learnings like this ads report into future aspects of the tools and the programs that we run in partnership with volunteers and campaigns. But that wasn't the only learning that we came out with recently. We also were able to publish our 2020 texting report, which actually got highlighted in Campaigns and Elections, which is an industry publication for campaign practitioners. And just like with advertising, texting exploded in 2020. And you probably felt that when your phone buzzed over and over and over again during the year. But the really important thing that we learned from this was that texting remains a powerful tool, even when 15 billion texts were sent in the election cycle. And it was particularly important that as this scales, campaigns continue to professionalize texting and are focusing on targeting, again, the right message to the right person, because you can get swing voters to turn out at better rates. And we also found you could get the least likely voters to turn out at much higher rates than what they were projected.
And one thing I always think that's sort of it's like silly, but also like emblematic of what can happen is when we started doing texting in 2017 and 18, it was sort of like emoji, always use emoji, jam your text full of emoji. It's going to increase, the response rate and the effectiveness. And Dylan, this year?
It was cost prohibitive, and also including them diminish the likelihood somebody would engage with you.
Yeah, so that's like one of the things that you got to keep the learning going, and watch for these changes, because it's almost assured that they come.
That also kind of alludes to one of the initiatives that we're doing right now in 2021 in Virginia, and the importance of being able to test messaging, not just at a particular point in election cycle, but across an election cycle and across multiple cycles. So we're working with organizations in Virginia to test messaging using digital advertising, specifically in this case, to help Democrats neutralize the defund the police attack while not compromising their values, which is a really difficult line for people to walk. And so coming up with messaging that resonates and pushes back against this attack, which unfortunately was really effective in the 2020 election cycle, is critical. Not only that, the alternative, which is the traditional phone polls, is very expensive. And so it means that people can only do it infrequently, and they end up getting really inaccurate results. So this type of message testing is critical because it'll let us see how particular reactions to messages will evolve in the lead up to the elections in Virginia in the end of November. And Elsa's actually been a critical part of this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say there is a question in the chat here that was asking about doing some of this work for the Texas Democratic Party, and I think this is a great opportunity, right? We're starting Virginia with this message testing about specific attacks that we know are coming on our candidates, and how can we really respond to those in the most effective way. I think this is something that I would love to see expand into other states, and something that we can really work on to provide concrete value to candidates and caucuses, with real in-person testing, and not necessarily a 20-minute poll call that is very cumbersome for a lot of the people and misses huge swaths of the electorate. So I'm excited about moving this forward.
And then, as you can imagine, all of this work generates a ton of data, and that ads report and texting report, it's not like we were sitting on it for months and months. It takes a ton of hours of cleaning, standardizing, and analyzing data to be able to figure out what messages actually work. So we're building out a data warehouse to streamline and automate this process. So in the future, it will only take weeks or even a few days to be able to understand what messages on Facebook or what emails on MailChimp or what texts through Hustle are resonating most. Right now, we're definitely in the development stage, but we've been able to release a few new pipelines that will automatically ingest and start standardizing that data so that teams can focus more on learning what works and less on the drudgery of cleaning things. That, Greg, I'll hand it back to you.
Not that anyone doesn't love data janitorial. Cool, thank you so much, Ellen. I will now bring up Rob Harrell, our state director for Virginia, to get out of the conceptual and planning and into the doing world.
Cool. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for turning out. I'm pumped up after hearing Representative Howard. Like that, if Texas is the cautionary tale, then Virginia can be our hopeful appendix to what we heard tonight, because it wasn't that long ago that Virginia was Texas, and what we've done in the last 2 years in Virginia is truly noteworthy. But it's also important to remember that we have a razor thin majority in Virginia in the House of Delegates, and we need to protect that. And that's what 2021 is about. We have 17 campaigns we're working with so far in the state of Virginia. We've already exceeded our expectations on that front, and we have 36 different projects, be it texting and ads projects, where you heard a little bit about what we're doing in terms of ads in Virginia, and then emails and websites. We've built a lot of websites already this cycle with a lot of great work from all of you. So thanks for that. And we have quite a few number of projects to go before we get to Election Day on November 2nd. And again, it's just, it's incredibly important, the work that we're doing here, because we don't want to revert back. In the 2 years since we've had control in the Commonwealth, we've abolished the death penalty, the first Southern state to do so. We've expanded Medicare, with real people getting added to the healthcare rolls and getting help that they needed. We've decriminalized marijuana. They've raised teacher pay and most importantly, expanded voter access. And now that we've gotten past the primary, and we've seen what the vote looks like, we think we're in a good position to continue the progress. Terry McAuliffe, who many of you know from being the head of the DNC, close friend of the Clintons, and former governor of the Commonwealth, will once again be running this cycle. So we have the top of the ticket set. And despite being known probably for his fundraising prowess, Governor McAuliffe expanded voter access to 200,000 disenfranchised former felons in the state his first term in office. So voting rights will be, of course, important in Virginia, and expanding those. So taking a look, a spotlight on some of the work that we've done. One slide is not enough to capture all the great work that everyone has done out there, but you can go that slide, Greg.
There we go.
But we have, like I said, I think we're up to 9 websites that we've built out. There's a couple examples here. Our first one of the cycle was first one was actually for the caucus, and then we did one for Deborah Gardner, who's running to flip a seat in House District 27. We've worked with some old friends in Virginia, like Delegate Mike Mullen, and we built him a new website fitting of all of the accomplishments he has had by himself in the House of Delegates. Namely, he was the one who wrote the bill to abolish the death penalty. And again, working with delegates like Delegate Fowler, who was instrumental when they expanded Medicare in her first term. We have lots more projects to work on. Again, just going back to what Representative Howard said, like, we don't want to be in a position where the only option is to be able to walk out to prevent dangerous legislation from passing. We want to be in the position that we're in now in Virginia, where we can really make substantial differences, and we can't do that without all the work that y'all put in to do that, whether it's on an email program that's raising critical dollars to get some of these incumbents reelected, or flip a few seats where we have a real opportunity to do so, or building out a website that gets that enhanced, improved messaging that we've been talking about out to the masses. So I will conclude on that note. And again, thanks for all the hard work you've already done, and looking forward to continuing that work through the next couple months here in Virginia.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'll just say, oh, go ahead.
No, I was teeing you up.
Yeah. So I love the work that we're doing in Virginia. As someone who comes from the campaign side, and I know Greg mentioned this earlier, I think one of the big problems that caucuses and down ballot races face is that there's so much turnover in the staff, right? All of your institutional knowledge leaves after every election because there's a very specific end date, right? Election's over, we don't need the campaign anymore, but that also means a lot of email programs and a lot of websites sit dormant for 2 years, for 4 years, while they're waiting for the next election. And so something that I'm really excited about us moving forward here is how can we help these caucuses and programs year round, help candidates and incumbents really maintain their email program, maintain their websites, maintain their volunteer recruitment and organizing. And so to that end, we've been working on a handful of states in Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We just launched a Michigan House website a couple weeks ago. And so we're working with all these programs so that they can continue to build strength going into 2022, and we don't have to start everything from scratch again. So this is something that I'm very excited about. I think it's a really incredibly important off-cycle work, like Representative Howard was saying, right? How can we continue to build all of these programs so that we can have democratic successes across the country?
Yeah, for sure. And I just say, it's a beautiful website, and Max Bretler, the designer on this, has been working at TFC, I think, since 2017. So he's gotten the reps in. Let's give him a shout out. and that whole team. Like Rob was gently hinting at, we have a need for people, for volunteers and staff. So raising money this year is huge. So if you are an email marketer, a copywriter, a team lead, you know anybody, you met somebody once, let them know on our shiny newish website, techforcampaigns.org, and share it on the socials. 2 is we are hiring. We're going to have 5 or 6 open roles over the next few months to build out all this stuff and do all the work. So we have open recs for a data engineer, for product management, and email marketing, content, and other opportunistic roles coming up too. So if you've ever been curious or know somebody who is, don't hesitate to reach out, even if it's not something that's directly a fit. So with that, we will wrap up the prepared portion of the program and would be happy to take any questions, if any, or we can go enjoy the not so pleasant heat, at least here on the West Coast. Oh, yes. Survey. I posted a link to a survey in the chat. We've been doing these all hands for a while, and want to make sure that we are continually learning and are building a learning engine, not just about what we're doing for campaigns, but also what we're doing at TFC. Please, 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 it's 2 questions. And the first question is like literally 1 click. You just got to select 1 through 5. It's super easy, I promise. But the second question, love any thoughts about how we can make this better for you. And hearing no questions as I speak very slowly to allow one to pop up. What kind of training do we provide? Great, thank you, Felipe. We want to expand. We train candidates and staff in digital basics of the caucuses that we work with. In last year, actually one of the most popular pages on our website is the virtual fundraiser how-to. Actually, because of these all hands, we've been doing these all hands as Zoom webinars for three years now. And so when COVID happened, we were ready to go with how to do a webinar. And that's continued to be a really useful guide. And as we interact with caucuses like in Michigan or Alaska, Virginia, we often have training sessions for candidates and their staff members. And it's one of the more higher leverage things that we can do. So the tools that we've built. So over the past few years, we've built a number of different things. One of the ones that we use the most is called Recruiter. It's an internal tool that we use to staff our projects and put them on the website and send emails and get track responses and the workflow tool around that, which kind of makes the whole thing, the whole process run. We've built tools for state legislative fundraising, Polaris, which is a fundraising tool that state legislative campaigns have used. So it's basically providing what would cost a lot of money in another context to help campaigns make fundraising requests for a low price. And we've done tools around analytics for voter contact and digital competitive ad spending tracking. So if you're in Virginia, we can track what all the Republicans are doing on Facebook and Google, and same with Democrats. And the data warehouse that Dylan mentioned is kind of a big focus this year. And yes, I put out the survey and realized there's no way to track the names of who responded to the survey. So I don't know how we're gonna do the t-shirt, but maybe message Rob and say that you did. You're really motivated by the free TFC shirt. So if you fill it out and you're motivated to get a free shirt, we will ship one to you.
Questions, Greg. I'm like, I got it right up here.
Yeah.
There is one more question, Greg. How will we decide which states to focus on for 2022? That's a great question. I think that there's a lot of competitive states out there currently. One of the big questions is redistricting. And we don't necessarily know where districts will lie or how they're going to be drawn. And that can leave a lot of states up in, unknown territories. But we've been working, in that dream world, I would work in all 50 states is my real answer. But we want to work in, states that are going to benefit, right? Places that need support and are looking to flip the districts, right? Texas, Arizona, Michigan, places that are hard. I'm not saying that we are working in these, but places that we're looking for. Greg, do you have a more answer?
Yeah, and Chris is on the call. He leads our Build the List team, which is a team of data scientists and data engineers who are unfortunately very experienced with the data janitorial work required to get political data. And they build a model that's sort of a long-term quantitative skeleton behind all this stuff. And they've actually been working on converting it to something that would be redistricting friendly, over the last year and a half. It's been a long process. So yeah, that's the redistricting is sort of a big question. But we then would proceed with both a quantitative and qualitative assessment. Jacob would love a shirt. Gotta respect the ask. Rob, you want to handle Robert's question or answer that about political copy?
We highly encourage it, but he's not here today because he's out camping, so I'm not going to embarrass him by mentioning. But we had a soon-to-be Stanford Cardinal on one of our projects. It's on one of our website projects this year. Who just he didn't have tons of experience, obviously. He was a little bit on the younger side, but he did an amazing job. He really took it to heart. He dug in, he learned as much as he could before he started on the project. And the reviews from his campaign team are they love him. They want to hire him if they could. So the short answer is, if you have passion, I think we can work with you. Although really, there is a skill to it. There's a lot involved, when you get on the copy and on the email marketing side of things. But certainly, if you're a good writer with good writing skills, we can kind of teach you the rest.
Yeah, sure. That is what we do. If you have the right skills, we help you through the political part. And got another t-shirt. Cool. All right, it is 6:30 here on the West Coast, which means it is even later everywhere else. So thank you everybody for attending. One more shout out for the survey. I see people responding, so thank you, and have a fantastic night. Bye.